For some, it may mean nothing, but for those who have stumbled, that single step may feel like a steep drop. The reminder was that to aid someone who had tripped, just one word was sufficient. With that, he calls out to Lee Seaman as power flows from his gaze. He declares that the boy was not a weakling, recognizing his bravery and resolve to tackle obstacles. Those words transformed everything, offering a fresh outlook and hope to the young man on his path. Since the emergence of creatures that destroyed humanity, the world had been split between raiders and non-raiders. The raider management building is displayed with its large windows. Sitting on a bench, Simon is summoned by the receptionist, feeling his heart pound with expectation. Nervously, he concludes there was no way to escape it, knowing it was time to confront the challenge. To become a raider, one must undergo the awakening judgment that examines one's energy and then take a qualification test. The protagonist descends by elevator, feeling his worry grow with each floor. He glances at the lab, observing the tools arranged in the room. The doctor skips the details since the boy had experienced that process many times and was acquainted with it. She also mentions that next year he would be there for the military, preparing for what was ahead. Concerned about the boy's state, she asked if he needs guidance, offering support. It would not be feasible to continue as things were, since the situation demanded an urgent shift. The boy replies that he just wanted to take the exam and depart, showing his sorrow. He enters the huge machine feeling a blend of worry and expectation for what was to come. The result of his test is 103, the same as previous years. Upon seeing that number, he feels disheartened that it never changes, not even by the tiniest amount. The doctor hands him a document and asks him to sign it, explaining the significance of the paper. There was a time when he believed it would be possible to achieve his dreams, hoping for a brighter future. The protagonist thanks her and exits the machine, realizing how cruel reality was on him and his hopes. The clouds part across the blue sky, revealing a bright and promising day. The boy calmly opens the door, feeling the comfort of the surroundings around him, and he enters his cluttered apartment with scattered items that reflect his busy routine. He opens his computer, assuming the game prizes would have been good and pleasing, but he's surprised to see something different, something that completely alters his expectations and plans. It was a message about a qualification condition that had been verified. It was a website with countless pieces of government data, but he wasn't sure how to use it. He started tinkering with the computer, searching for more details. Suddenly, he realized what it was about, understanding the importance of the information he had found. Tony wanted to learn more about that strange site, intrigued by the contents and their implications. In his chair, he read all the posted texts, absorbing every detail and trying to uncover the hidden secrets. He wanted to unravel all the mysteries behind that webpage. On the computer, he decided to check the day's news, eager to know what was happening in the world. He is stunned to read something about the raider on Sunjin who had received the Platinum Award. All those comments praised the man, celebrating his accomplishments and impressive abilities on the battlefield. But the boy was furious, thinking it was a harsh and unfair prank because he used to see that face every day, the one that bullied him without mercy or kindness. He hated the fact that that jerk had become a famous raider, feeling betrayed and upset by the situation. He takes down a note from the wall showing his daily workouts, trying to distract himself from the frustration. He was still very annoyed with the news he had read, feeling the anger bubbling inside him. Crumpling the paper, he showed his rage, making it clear how much that situation troubled him. He opened the computer again, determined to find a way to cope with his frustrations. The protagonist knew he was a failure for quitting school, thinking he would become a raider. The qualification message appears again, but he doesn't grasp what it means. It seemed like the entry of a new member. He starts a chat with someone named Kim Bong. Looking a bit more, he sees other messages and doubts that really was a wizard. Unaware, a force begins to appear in his room. A hole starts to form, but he doesn't care, sending messages for his computer partner to find him. Looking back, he realizes the immense power that awaited him. A voice calls out to him, asking if he was really the jobless, bumly seaman. The boy is scared by what was in front of him, feeling a shiver down his spine. The rift reveals another world completely different, full of colors and unfamiliar shapes. The woman touches the water with her feet, exploring the liquid surface and feeling the lively energy. Curious, she states that she came exactly to meet the boy, revealing her purpose directly. She passes through the gateway and now steps into Seaman's realm. Defying the laws of reality, in shock, the boy lets out a startled yell at the woman's sudden and strange appearance. But the sorceress throws something at him, wrapping him in magical power that changes his view of the situation. He tries to fight but lets it go, while the strain in the air grows between the two. She is very strong with the help of her stick and asks him not to get so upset. The air seems to leave his chest, making it tough to breathe and increasing his panic. The woman sees he is very feeble, checking his state and the need to aid him, and she doesn't understand how he managed to link to the special network since his skills were so basic. Held by the woman, the boy finds no escape, feeling the stress of the situation rise every moment. Curious, she wants to know his name, but he would only talk if she let him go first. Determined to guard his secrecy without thinking twice, she frees him, deciding the knowledge was more important than care, and he drops with his full weight to the ground, feeling the hit and sudden freedom. The girl presents herself as Ayana, smiling as she watches his reaction and the setting around them, and she asks if he was lying about being a hunter. Stammering, the boy says he's not a full hunter yet, but he would become one. He explains that in his world, not everyone had enough energy to become hunters and chase beasts. Interested, she asks him to show his energy. He brings his hands together and begins to display his powers, focusing all his strength into a single spot, but his energy is still very weak, unable to hold itself for long under the strain. The light that shines from his hands flickers, showing his inner struggle and lack of power. The woman can't believe that was all, surprised by the feebleness of the power display, but the boy seems very sure, determined to show he still has something to give. Laughing, she asks if this is some kind of prank, finding the situation somewhat funny. Everything in the apartment starts to shift as if an unseen force were waking and coming to life. The clothes on the drying rack are moved by a strong wind, creating a show of motion around them. The mighty Ayana reveals her energy, sending out a bright power that lights up the room around her, and the boy is very amazed by her strength, admiring the force she shows easily in her essence. She could be a beast, leaving a troubling doubt in his mind. The woman keeps glowing as she calls out to the boy. Scared, he pleads for his life, feeling the stress of the situation and the looming threat. Someone knocks at the door, asking if the boy from room 203 was fine. Interrupting the tense moment, the noise sounded like a quake, making the walls tremble and increasing the worry in the room. The woman stops using her powers, realizing that the situation was becoming more complex than she expected, and she realizes she used her save points on a failure, thinking about her choices and what they meant. Nervous, he wants to know how someone like him managed to access the special network, but the boy has no answers. He just opened his laptop and saw all of that in front of him, surprised by the situation. Looking at the device, she demands that he keep explaining, her interest growing with each moment. Finally, she asks him to talk about himself while watching his feelings and reactions closely. Laughing, the boy said he had nothing unique, trying to shift attention from his reality. The woman notices that the boy lives poorly, seeing the signs of his daily struggle and loneliness, and he seemed very pitiful, making her question her choices in his future. Her gaze remains fixed on her thoughts. Those words of indifference were filled with comfort, so Gavana told his story about being a fortunate orphan, not accepted by his current look. He was judged as an awakened person during his school years, but harsh bullying led him to quit, so he ended up with his current life, tired of his numbers never changing for 6 long years. With that, the girl realizes that his story was very dull, lacking feeling or interest, and she needed to leave, feeling she had wasted time on a talk that didn't engage her. She exits through the gateway, saying he shouldn't mess with the special network anymore, or he might end up dead. Before vanishing, she gave one last warning, carving her words in the boy's mind. Looking into his eyes, she stated that the world was naturally unfair, a truth he needed to accept, but even so, he should go out and do something, since he was human and should live. Finally, the protagonist asks if they could meet again, hoping for a positive reply, but she doesn't answer. She only gives a mysterious smile and tells him to rise, leaving him curious about what it meant to stand side by side with them, an idea that both excites and scares him at the same time. Looking at something in his hand, he wonders if he too could become a special being, wanting to learn more about it. He writes an apology letter, expressing his emotions and the need to redeem himself for his deeds. Determined, he writes to the brothers and sisters of the Transcendent Network. He types that Lee Seaman, the jobless drifter, was about to lose his mind with intense thoughts. Since then, watching the Transcendent Network had become part of his daily habit. He saw a new picture of the famous Black Lion, who was born the son of a slave from a noble family and became a soldier after the loss of his mother, turning into the mightiest warrior on the continent by defeating the aristocracy. The man had shared a family photo from his last journey full of joyful memories. Soon after, he saw something about Persian Hyong Nim, who held the Persian demon sword, a legendary weapon. He was the top swordmaster on the continent, known for his unmatched skills and renown. The boy chatted with the character, who was asking for advice about a girl, seeking tips on how to approach her. The boy's hobby was that transcendent network. The advice was to get closer to a girl's heart through her feelings, even using a pickup line. He could ask where her wings were, referring to the girl's angelic look, and if she smiled, he could say his heart would burst because of her grin. He gave tip after tip to his online friend. Hung Nim thanked him for the help and said that if all went well, he would stop by to visit his companion. When Seaman read that message, he became very worried, feeling a chill down his spine, since he wasn't supposed to be interacting with transcendent beings. He knew it could bring serious consequences. He recalled that they kept their promises, never turning their backs after making a vow. Unlike them, the boy's routine was completely dull, with no excitement or challenges to inspire him. He had to admit something to himself, acknowledging his limits and the truth of his life, since someone like him could never be a raider. He felt trapped in his own mediocrity. Distressed, he grabbed a bottle, seeking a way to escape his thoughts and frustrations, and he drank the entire contents at once, trying to drown his worries and inner pain. Tired, he threw himself on the bed, seeking a bit of comfort after an exhausting day. With eyes full of tears, he realized he had created false hopes about himself. Reflecting on his choices until now, he had never imagined anything different, feeling stuck in a cycle of disappointment and frustration. He really wanted to become a true raider and prove that he hadn't been wrong all this time. He wanted to proudly show them his successes, but the reality was very different. After being stuck at level 103, 6 years must have passed with no progress, and now the character couldn't even get out of bed, feeling completely defeated and unmotivated, just using his computer for days. He got lost in a cycle of apathy and loneliness. He wrote a message saying he truly wanted to change his life. While drinking a little more from his bottle, he tried to find the courage to alter his situation. With bravery, he made a post, hoping his words might connect with someone who would understand, and he fell asleep, collapsing on top of the laptop, exhausted and without energy. Sometime later, he began to wake up, feeling the confusion and disorientation around him. With a hand on his face, he realized he had slept, surprised by how much time had passed without him noticing. His face turned red upon realizing he had written something on the forum while drunk. He began scrolling through the pages and reading everything there, absorbing each word and feeling countless messages of support were sent to him, filling him with unexpected hope and motivation. The boy became very thoughtful, pondering his choices and the impact he had on those around him. While a light appeared in his room, he felt a shift in the atmosphere, as if something was about to happen. Without realizing it, the figure was already behind him. While he was still happy with the messages he had received, a voice asked if that was the jobless drifter, sounding authoritative and full of scorn. Afraid, the boy didn't move, paralyzed by the tension and the uncertainty of what would come next. Trembling for his life, he recognized who it was just by hearing the familiar and threatening voice. The transcendent member touches his back, causing a wave of energy to surge through his body. Suddenly, he jumps out of his chair, surprised and frightened, feeling adrenaline take over him. His body is radiated by a powerful energy pulsing, a force he had never felt before. His veins bulge, and it looked like snakes were all over his body, sliding under his skin. He remembers a friend telling him not to show off, a warning that echoes in his mind. The masked figure remains in his room, emanating a threatening presence that makes him uneasy. Angrily, the boy looks back, staring at the figure with determination and defying his fear. His fist begins to clench, preparing to try to defend himself. He wouldn't give up so easily, determined to fight for his dignity and for a better future. He tries to dodge the masked figure while enduring the pain. Suddenly, the two characters are in a completely different place. Lost, the boy doesn't recognize the space. Dako Chi, the greatest martial artist in history, declares that Seaman would no longer be a coward. In a world where modern fantasy intertwines with reality, a young man finds himself facing incredible challenges. Amid fierce battles and unexpected discoveries, he realizes that his power is unmatched, capable of shaking even the strongest opponents. Rumors about his skill spread fast, attracting the attention of allies and foes alike. His body, once accustomed to a boring routine, now adjusts to a new reality where amazing abilities emerge. The sudden sense of lightness suggests that something has deeply transformed within him. As he faces increasingly tough trials, He meets legendary figures like the great witch Liana, whose power is admired by many. But even when facing such mighty beings, he realizes that he has the potential to surpass them, to shape the world to his will. Between battles and moments of reflection, the journey continues. Each step brings him closer to an unknown fate where hidden secrets await to be uncovered. In a moment of solitude, he looked around and realized that, after all the cleaning, the only remnant of garbage left in that room was himself. The feeling of inadequacy troubled him, but deep down, a spark of determination still glowed. Destiny belonged to the persistent, to those who refused to surrender. To change his own path, he needed to become the strongest, the one who invades and conquers without doubt. The stars shine for those who gaze at them, and he wished to reach that glow. Memories of the past returned, bringing with them the recollection of a striking meeting and words that echoed in his mind. He had never been a coward and needed to prove it. Exhaustion overtook his body after a simple jog, and hunger became unbearable. Still, he knew he couldn't stop. Deep down, he always knew he needed to transform. The suppression of what was weak and useless had to end. If he wanted a new start, he would have to seek strength with his own hands. The world offered no mercy to the frail. Only those who grow stronger have the right to advance. Upon entering a gym, he found himself in an environment filled with the smell of sweat and resolve. In front of him, an extremely muscular man observed him with curiosity. Trainer Kim Deokwa quickly noticed his presence. His experienced gaze detected something in the newcomer, as if he could sense his uncertainty. Without holding back words, he asked if the newcomer was truly there to train. The atmosphere grew tense for a moment, but there was no turning back. With no other choice, he followed the trainer's guidance and began the warm-up. With the intense pace, the strain soon came, and his body began to feel the effects of the effort. Kim Deokwa, however, noticed something different. There was a foundation there, a trace of past conditioning. Smiling confidently, the trainer assured him that with commitment, he could regain his form swiftly. The training continued, and exhaustion wasn't long in arriving. Gasping, he tried to catch his breath, realizing that this journey would be more difficult than he had imagined, but if he wanted to change, there was no other path to follow. His training intensified and pushed his body to the limit. Every muscle ached, every breath felt inadequate, but the trainer's words echoed in his mind. There was no room for doubt. If he fell, he had to rise, and if he wanted to change, he had to act without questioning himself. Determined not to quit, he forced his legs to move again. His problem wasn't a lack of strength or stamina, but a lack of belief. With a new drive, he kept going, even when exhaustion threatened to bring him down. When the training finally ended, a rare feeling of achievement took hold of him. It had been a long time since he had felt that sensation, as if he were truly progressing. But it was still only the beginning. Upon returning home, he remembered something important. The advice of a certain brother Dakochi came to mind, to check the tip board. Accessing the system, he came across a new task. A specific mission had been assigned to him. To move forward, he needed to reduce his weight to under 100 kilo. At first, his shock quickly gave way to resolve. If that was the first step, he would take it. If that was the first step toward reaching his aim, then there was no option but to tackle the challenge directly. With the mission clear in his thoughts, Lee Seaman decided he would achieve the impossible to attain his target. Reducing his weight to under 100 ki would not be simple, but he was resolute. Every day he went out to jog, ignoring tiredness and muscle ache. At the start, each step felt like agony, but he kept pushing to surpass his own boundaries. Sweat drenched his clothes, and his breath wavered, but the aim was clear. He could not quit. As the days passed, the changes began to appear. His body was no longer as hefty, his movements were more nimble, and even those around him started to notice. Some were amazed to see him running tirelessly, while others simply observed, doubting his persistence. Looking at the scale, he wondered if he had already shed a bit of weight. Even if the progress was gradual, he knew he was on the right track. With this renewed drive, he decided he would push even harder the next day. The transformation was not only physical, but also mental. He was no longer the same person as before, and little by little, he was getting closer to becoming truly powerful. Every drop of sweat that fell to the ground was proof of Lee Seaman's steadfast effort. He knew that if he wanted to become stronger, he had to keep going regardless of the pain or fatigue. His intense training did not go unnoticed. Gym regulars began to notice his dedication, admiring his resolve. It was rare to see someone putting in so much work. However, not everyone shared the same respect. Between ordinary people and the so-called invaders, there was an impassable barrier. Even those at lower levels who had surpassed the blue mark possessed physical abilities far beyond normal humans. For them, the world worked differently, with immense rewards and a sense of privilege that separated them from the rest of society. Despite this, Lee Seaman did not let himself be rattled. He felt the presence of these mighty people around him, but that only fueled his determination. He was not a quitter. Even if he had to fight against all odds, he would keep moving forward until he achieved his aim. After weeks of tough training and unwavering resolve, Lee Seaman was finally close to reaching his first target. The moment of truth had arrived. With anticipation, he stepped on the scale, holding his breath. Then the display lit up with the numbers 100.2 ki. Frustration took over him, just 0.22 kilometers above the target. For a moment, he thought of the most obvious solution. Maybe a trip to the bathroom would do it. Wasting no time, he tried again. The display now read 100.05 kilo. He couldn't believe it. Even after all the effort, he was still a fraction away from the goal. But he would not give up. Pushing out every last drop of sweat and water from his body, the scale finally showed 99.9 kilo. A message appeared before him confirming his success. As a reward for completing the mission, he received 100 points in the Transcendent Network. However, there was still a limitation. The tip board could only be accessed by members level 2 or higher. Even so, this was just the beginning, and he had proven to himself that he could change. Now all that remained was to keep moving forward. After accessing the Transcendent Network tip board, Lee Seaman realized that increasing his level required 100 points. Determined, he didn't hesitate to confirm his choice. In front of him, several posts appeared, covering various topics, from legendary martial techniques to hidden secrets about the invaders. Everything seemed possible within that space. Some posts promised unbelievable skills, while others talked about unexplained events. With each reading, 100 points were deducted, and to publish something, the cost was 200 points. However, any view received on one's own post generated a return of 10 points. As a celebration for the first access, he had the chance to read one post without spending anything. His attention was immediately drawn to the unemployed Bumi Seaman. The author of the post was none other than Dako Chama, the greatest demonic martial artist. Upon opening the post, he was introduced to a transcendental skill called Void Severance. The text explained that the flow of internal energy begins in the lower dantian and circulates through the entire body, completing a cycle. However, those with severed meridians were unable to perform this circulation correctly, causing their energy to fade like smoke. The solution presented was clear. If an appropriate cultivation method were applied, then the circulation of internal energy could be restored, allowing the body to escape this restriction. Dako Chama claimed he would share this transcendental skill with those who followed his instructions. The technique was called Taijutsu Flow, and its practice promised to unlock the true potential of the body and internal energy. Until that moment, Lee Seaman had always seen aura as something to be controlled and mastered. Now he was beginning to see a new viewpoint on his own path. However, Dako Chama, the celestial demon, treated aura as if it were a living entity with its own will. That had been the answer all along, a deep understanding of the nature of aura that he passed on to his followers. Sitting on a bench, the young man took a deep breath, feeling the weight of training. The blue glow flowed through his hands as he focused, guiding the energy through his body. He told himself that he needed to break through his internal blockages. With a crack, the aura expanded, breaking through an invisible barrier. The pressure around him shifted, and he let out a sigh while looking up at the sky. There was still a long way to go, but that was a step forward. The technique taught by Dako Chama required complete focus, and the aura was meant to flow naturally, spreading like roots and adapting to the surroundings like water. The training demanded discipline, requiring patience and control. Elsewhere, the Taesong Private Raid Training Academy remained in full swing. The heat of mock battles and intense drills filled the environment where budding warriors sought to sharpen their skills. Inside the building, a student approached his superior, bringing a report. Someone was waiting to see him. The leader's watchful gaze lifted, pondering the visitor's identity before making a choice. It was Lee Seaman, his former student, and a long time had passed since their last meeting. Wan Hung-hoon watched with surprise and joy at the presence of Lee Seaman, who now stood before him. He recognized him instantly, as well as the pride in the young man's progress. The journey to that point had been tough, but the effort had paid off, whether he had become a raider or not. The achievement was clear. The atmosphere filled with a sense of friendship, and the idea of a celebration seemed fitting. However, Lee Seaman was not there for that. Hwan Jong-hoon realized there was a more serious reason behind the visit. The young man's firm gaze revealed his true intent. He needed an assessment. His aura, which once seemed like a hurdle, now needed to be examined carefully. His master accepted the request and instructed his students to continue self-training while he stepped away. The examination began. The aura measurement was conducted with accuracy, revealing a surprising result. The curse that had once restricted him had been lifted. The progress he had made in just 1 month was remarkable. Circulating his aura using the supreme method had been the key to overcoming that obstacle. The question naturally arose, how had he achieved such a feat? The answer, however, held no great secrets. He had simply followed the advice of someone he had met by chance, testing whether it would work. A simple act of trying opened the path to something amazing. Hwan Jong-hoon showed excitement at Lee Seaman's growth, fascinated by the young man's progress. He saw a chance to test him further and proposed a sparring match, something that could benefit not only Seaman, but also another student at the academy. There was one particularly cocky student who relied only on the raw strength of his aura. To the master, that duel would serve as a valuable lesson, a way to show him the limits of his approach. Moreover, he was certain that Lee Seaman would have no trouble handling him. Faced with the proposal, Seaman paused for a moment, thinking about the situation. He asked what the opponent's aura level was and received the answer, approximately 1,000. That surprised him. The master was really putting someone who had barely reached that level up against him. Doubt crept in, but at the same time, curiosity sparked. Soon the opponent introduced himself. Jinsei, bold and carefree, stared at Seaman with a sharp look. The greeting between the two was brief, without ceremony. The fight was about to start. The rules were simple: hand-to-hand combat with no weapons. The match began, and Jinsei, puffed up by his confidence, charged in without delay. His plan was clear: to beat his opponent using only his aura. But in the heat of the battle, the first attack failed. Still pressing forward against the protagonist, he claimed that this was the end for him. But in the blink of an eye, Lee Seaman trapped the boy's legs, slamming him hard to the ground and then performing a grappling technique. Raiders, for the most part, did not usually dedicate significant time to practicing in martial arts, and the reason was clear: situations where those skills were useful were scarce. Their battles most often happened against non-humanoid creatures, where hand-to-hand combat methods lost importance in the face of effective aura usage and strong weapons. However, at that moment, the situation was different. There, inside the academy, the fight was not against an irrational beast, but between two human fighters. In this context, technique and strategy made all the difference. The combat started with intensity, but it quickly became clear who controlled the fight. Lee Seaman moved with smoothness and accuracy, predicting each of Jin's attacks and responding effectively. His opponent, used to relying only on his aura, found himself in difficulty. Strikes were thrown but only hit air. Desperate tries to land a hit on Seaman resulted in useless movements, while he stayed one step ahead. The advantage was obvious. Lee Seaman managed the pace of the combat without giving his opponent any chance to recover, and that fight seemed to have only one possible outcome. Lee Seaman's victory over Jinsei was undeniable. But Master Gwangjong-hwan kept a calm attitude. He knew that the result was not only due to Seaman's natural ability, but also the tireless dedication the young man had shown over time. While Jin's blindly trusted in his aura, Seaman had shaped his body and mind through hard and steady training. That fight had come to an end, but the impact of the victory did not go unnoticed. Lee Seaman's name began to spread, catching the attention of other students and even newcomers who hoped to follow a similar path. Amid the whispers in the academy, comments about his impressive change spread quickly, and among the curious, a nervous young man approached, showing admiration and doubt. He asked whether Seaman's physical transformation had really happened in just 3 months. The answer was straightforward: it was possible, as long as there was determination and genuine effort. Inspired, the young man voiced his wish to reach the same level. However, before starting any journey, he was reminded of something essential: respect for hierarchy. Before asking Lee Seaman for advice, he should show respect to the true leader of the place, Director Kim Dukba. Finally, he introduced himself with a firm yet friendly expression. He invited the new recruits for a more private talk in his office. Then the atmosphere was filled with anticipation, but one question lingered in the air. Would those newcomers have the strength necessary to endure the same path Lee Seaman had walked? The new recruits showed unwavering determination, Without any hesitation, they accepted the terms without considering the possibility of backing out, even signing the documents, sealing their commitment to the training. Director Kim Dukba watched the scene with a pleased smile. Youthful determination was always admirable, but the real question was whether they could maintain that drive as they faced real challenges. Meanwhile, the training grew tougher. The beginning of the martial arts technique, Xing Yi Quan, marked a new stage for the students. From the very first day, the physical demands already proved overwhelming. The effort was relentless, and some were already showing signs of tiredness. Among the watchful eyes of the academy, some veterans observed the newcomers with curiosity and doubt. Comments arose among them, questioning the presence of a new member. For some, that newcomer had the attitude of an outsider, and for others, he simply seemed like an experienced stranger, someone who had already walked a longer path than they had. The environment was full of expectations, and each new step suggested that the training had only just begun. In recent days, Lee Seaman began to notice odd looks following him whenever he went to the academy. The feeling of being watched bothered him, but he couldn't grasp why. Among the familiar faces, one particular gaze stood out. A slim and seemingly shy newcomer seemed to watch him often. Seaman felt uneasy with the situation, unsure how to understand this sudden notice. When the approach finally occurred, it came unexpectedly. The young man presented himself with some hesitation but soon shared his purpose. He suspected Lee Seaman's true identity. The question surprised Seaman. The newcomer wanted to know if he was a raider. For a moment, Seaman feared that his secret might have been exposed, but he quickly realized that the tone of the talk wasn't hostile. With a relieved breath, he confirmed that, although he wasn't yet an official raider, he was training for the test that would happen in a month. Then, the young man made a disclosure of his own. He, too, was an awakened. However, unlike Seaman, his parents banned him from pursuing the path of a raider until he became an adult. Even so, he wanted to boost his skills, seeking a balance between studies and practice. Seaman understood the situation. Becoming a raider required more than just talent and aura. It demanded strong commitment and countless hours of effort, but the boy in front of him didn't seem ready to quit. When asked about his drive, he replied without pause. To him, being a raider was simply incredible. The job was the most desired among students in Korea, and nothing seemed more thrilling than becoming one. Curious, Seaman asked if he could already control aura. The young man confirmed, though with some doubt. Seaman then dared him to show it. The test would happen right there and then. Lee Seaman observed closely as the young man displayed his ability with aura. Though a beginner, he seemed to have a firm foundation, mentioning he had learned from a starter's course taught by the famous raider, Anjin. Seaman nodded, urging him to keep practicing. Aura control was one of the most vital basics for a raider, and the young man showed great zeal for improving his abilities. The exchange between the two deepened his sense of friendship. The newcomer saw Seaman as someone on the same journey, someone who shared the same goal. He said they would meet at the top as true stars of the future. Seaman grinned at the boy's boldness and responded with the same resolve. That meeting reignited his own competitive drive. If the newcomers were training so hard, he couldn't afford to slack. Determined to push himself further, Seaman focused on the basics of aura handling, reviewing the fundamental teachings with care. At the same time, the raider qualification test was approaching fast. Seaman began to hunt for details about the exam, accessing bulletin boards and past records. The deepened test, considered the toughest phase of qualification, was cloaked in mystery. Every year the format of the test changed unexpectedly, with no one knowing in advance what the task would be. He knew the only way to be prepared for anything was to further enhance his skills. With that in mind, he increased his training, resolved to face any challenge that came his way. Lee Seaman continued his intense preparation for the raider qualification exam, aware that even those who passed the earlier stages often failed the final, deepened test. The exam was unpredictable and sparked debates among candidates and experts. Many questioned the value of certain tasks, arguing that being a raider should be about battling and defeating monsters. While researching the test, Seaman came across ads promising guesses of practical questions, even suggesting contacts within the association. He rejected the idea of buying information, believing only those unsure in their own skills turned to such methods. During his routine, he was approached by Kim Seona, a worker from a company that was also backing a promising rookie. The talk took an unexpected turn when Seona suggested a wager between her rookie and Seaman to see who would do better on the exam. Seaman accepted without delay, seeing the chance as yet another reason to give his all. Even more determined, he vowed to himself that he would make his name shine among the raiders. His training and effort would take him to the top without shortcuts or unfair benefits. Lee Seaman entered the qualification exam room determined to give his best. He knew this year's test would be tough, but that didn't scare him. Even before the test began, he noticed the presence of someone familiar in the room. Another candidate, who seemed to know him, also showed a strong wish to succeed, refusing to be left behind. The test began. He noticed the presence of someone familiar in the room. Another candidate, who seemed to recognize him, also showed a strong wish to succeed, refusing to be left behind. Staven kept his focus, recalling all the effort he had put in up to that moment. The first exam was written and required deep understanding of monsters, combat tactics, and risky situations. Some questions included ancient texts and complex math, while others demanded quick analysis of battle scenarios. Lee carefully studied each question, remembering what he had learned and applying clear reasoning. He felt that, despite the challenge, all his preparation had been worth it. It wasn't enough to have power. Intelligence and knowledge were equally vital to becoming a true raider. The written exam came to an end, and Lee Seaman put down his pen, feeling the tension fade. He looked around and saw that many candidates were tired, some still mentally checking their answers. Then the bell rang through the room, marking the official end of the test. The exam proctor announced the end of the time and instructed everyone to stop writing. However, 3 candidates continued to move, trying to add something to their sheets. The proctor warned them, but the decision had already been made. The 3 were immediately disqualified. Shock filled the room. That moment served as a reminder that in the world of raiders, following the rules was not a choice but a necessity for survival. The explanation was direct and firm. Following the rules was crucial because any carelessness could put the entire team at risk. The candidates remained silent, absorbing the lesson. With one last warning, the examiner wished everyone good luck. Simon took a deep breath. The written exam was just the first hurdle, but the real challenge was yet to come: the depth test. The weight of the exam still hung over Lee Seaman as he tried to calm himself. The exam had been tough, but he believed he had done well enough to pass. Now, the next challenge would be the aura measurement. The minimum requirement for a qualified raider was 5,000, and the last time he checked, his level was at 5,100. He knew he was on the edge but couldn't let doubt take over. As he tried to focus, he noticed movement around him. Some candidates were using aura inside the waiting room, showing confidence or perhaps trying to scare others. Simon felt the pressure grow and his thoughts started to become messy. To dispel the nervousness, he tried to recall the teachings of the celestial demon, the harmony between yin and yang, the principles of origin, growth, and honesty. He took a deep breath, seeking balance. At that moment, flashes from the past invaded his mind. He remembered the time he declared his wish to become a raider. His adopted parents had never doubted him, always supporting him without hesitation. That thought brought a new spark, renewing his resolve. Lost in his own focus, he was abruptly interrupted by the teacher calling his attention. Cultivating aura in a safe place was essential, and he had completely forgotten about his surroundings. Recognizing his mistake, he quickly apologized. Lee Seaman listened carefully while the other raiders spoke about their experiences. He understood that, despite the principles and rules, there were times when survival came before any teaching. The veteran mentioned how he had to build aura in forests filled with monsters and how he never had a moment of rest since entering the raider life. Each battle was dangerous, but one in particular was etched in his memory: the subjugation of the gate. Lee was immediately curious. The raider said that beyond the gate, he encountered countless strange creatures, but one of them was particularly terrifying: the Black Castle. That monster, despite being listed in the Monster Encyclopedia, was never officially recorded because no one had managed to defeat it. He described how he attacked the creature several times, without it even retreating, slowly approaching him. The fear was still evident in his voice. Simon was about to ask for more details when he was interrupted by the announcement of the end of the aura measurement. His heart raced as he realized he needed to hurry. Then the site manager appeared and, realizing the urgency, promptly offered to guide him to the first floor. Someone thanked him and quickly headed to the measurement, knowing it would be a decisive moment in his life. The scene grew tense with the unexpected announcement of an aura over 30,000. Now the situation grew more competitive and intense. Who was this person with such power, and what would it mean for the other candidates, like Lee Seaman, who was about to test his own aura? The tension increased and everyone was on guard, knowing that someone with such a strong aura could alter the course of the competition. Our protagonist walked through the hallways shouting the shocking value to be reached, 30,000, while experts usually achieve around 20,000. He wondered what kind of kid she was, while his coworker told him she was called Bang You By and added that she was supposedly incredible. After hearing that name, he began to ponder mentally if this someone was just a girl, while the others grieved. Our hero started recalling the redhead, getting annoyed, not wanting to believe it could be her. He asked his coworker if there were any failed candidates in that place, but his coworker said it was impossible to score less than 5,000 points. The protagonist gave a nervous laugh, confirming what his coworker had said, adding that his score was only 5,100. The line kept moving, the candidates entering the room one by one, with our boy being the last to be called. The doctor asked him to lie down on the machine to conduct the test. He obeyed, lying down and starting his meditation while being scanned. He appeared very anxious, gripping his fingers tightly until the doctor called him and said that his result was 780 points. The protagonist suddenly stood up as the doctor thanked him for participating. The boy began crying with joy for having achieved a much higher score than before, and he started to thank endlessly as if he were giving praise to God for the result. Then he began thanking the doctor, wishing him a very successful year ahead, while people around him watched the scene with confusion. Finally, he exited the examination room, throwing his arms into the air and letting out a shout of happiness as he walked down the hallway. He began replying to messages on his phone about his test and inviting a person he was chatting with to hang out sometime later. In the late afternoon of that day, our boy was whistling a tune while waiting inside a cafe that looked a lot like Starbucks, still filled with joy. He kept thinking about how the world was such a wonderful place until something caught his attention. He noticed the red-haired girl passing by on the street. This made him quite annoyed as the girl showed not even a hint of modesty as her group passed by. He observed the weapons of the adventurers with her and how they shone elegantly. He kept admiring those weapons while thinking to himself when a hand suddenly approached his back from behind. A boy with glasses startled him by shouting and calling him brother while giving him a push. He followed that up by asking how the test went. Our boy said the test went amazingly well and asked what they liked to eat, with his brother saying he wanted pork belly. Said and done, they ordered the very fancy and decorated dish with resolve. The protagonist said he was offering this out of the goodness of his heart and kindness, so if they didn't eat it, he would. As he kept praising the look and taste of the food, Jay looked at the dish, captivated, as the smell filled the place. Finally, he asked if the protagonist wouldn't like to work in a famous restaurant, but he was interrupted by the protagonist telling him to just eat already. Our hero began warning his companion, telling him to be quiet and stop joking, while the boy with glasses teased him, saying this was an attempt at persuasion. Suddenly the door opened with the bell ringing. The red-haired girl's group entered the place with everyone accompanying her. They were immediately served and given a table for 5 adults, while the protagonist got extremely annoyed by what just happened. The girl drew our hero's attention, greeting him and saying they were meeting again. Before he could respond, she turned to her companion Yubi and said that this was the one who set her up. Hearing this challenge, Yubi introduced herself with a surprised look, while our boy also introduced himself, somewhat awkwardly. Seaman wondered in his mind if that girl was the one with the 30,000 aura. After the introductions, the group started to walk away, but the protagonist asked them to wait a moment as he called out to Shanha, because she had mentioned a bet he was supposedly involved in. But, irritated, he insisted he never agreed to it. Later that night, the protagonist's friends were thanking him for the meal as they walked down the street. Jin asked who those girls were that talked to Seaman earlier, adding that they were very pretty, but the boy simply said not to judge people by their looks. Next, he jumped on his friends and told them to choose their friendships carefully while inviting them to karaoke for a second round. While they were walking happily, he suddenly felt something strange, a terrifying pressure that made him lose his calm instantly. He looked back to see what happened, noticing cracks in the air. His friend with glasses asked what was going wrong. Our hero forcefully called out his friends' names, then hugged them and pushed them firmly, telling them to run away as fast as they could. In his thoughts, he added that he had a very bad feeling. He remembered the day when a portal opened in front of him and told his friends that it was the same, that a portal was about to open. Something his friends didn't understand. He suddenly yelled at Park, saying that a portal was about to open. A loud boom was heard as a black and red portal began to open. This portal grew larger and larger while everyone stared in its direction, and from within the portal emerged a monster resembling a furious dragon with several red eyes in the background. Finally, Seaman exclaimed the name Sinus, hostile monster number 22. Sinus appeared, roaring, leaving everyone stunned and frozen in place. Its roar was so strong that it began to shatter the windows all around from the impact wave, and the terrified people started fleeing the area quickly, as if their lives depended on it, and they really did. However, Seaman was so stunned by the scene that his body couldn't even move. Shinha's group arrived without wasting any time, ordering everyone to evacuate and stepping in to handle the situation. Shin ordered Yubi to take charge of escorting the rescue team just before the battle began. As the fight started, we were given an explanation of what this group was, the Iron Horse Company. This association was not among the top 3, but it was known for its small, elite unit. The battle began with Sinus striking the group's tank with its tail, the tank blocking with his shield. Sen charged forward, slicing at the monster's tail as she ran toward it. However, before she could finish her strike, she noticed something. More monsters began to emerge from the portal. Dangerous monsters, identification number 8, Yorg, huge tooth-filled dogs, exited the portal. They ignored the swordswoman, running right past her. In desperation, the warrior yelled for someone to stop the attack, but it was already too late. One of the monsters bit down on a civilian's arm, making him scream in pain while crying out for help. Our protagonist watched this from a distance, shocked and frozen. He said in his thoughts that he should take action and help the civilian, reflecting that he trained for years for a moment like this. He ended his thought by shouting internally for his body to move. But surprisingly, it was Jay who attacked the monster with strong resolve in his eyes. Park struck the canine with a wooden plank, knocking the monster away. However, the monster only became more enraged and prepared to charge again. The dog lunged once more at the boy, who used the piece of wood to defend himself, while the protagonist watched in the background. In his observations, he noticed that even though Jay had no training, he still fought skillfully in that battle. He finished his thought by calling him a genius. Just as Park kicked the monster, more monsters appeared to attack him, while the protagonist continued watching, reflecting that his friend could become a great invader. But then one of the dogs managed to reach him, biting his shoulder brutally. Park fell to the ground, his arm taken by the beast. Seeing this scene finally pushed our hero to take action, rushing toward his friend. The dog stared down the boy while holding Park's arm in its mouth. This sent Sen into total fury, screaming for her teammate while her aura seemed to surge. She ran toward the monster, preparing a punch, but suddenly a spear passed by from behind her, striking the monster before it could reach her. An invader in the background asked if Sina was okay, and she confirmed she was, but yelled that her friend was seriously injured. Our protagonist picked up his friend in his arms, pleading for him to hang in there, and his friend quickly replied that this wasn't his time yet. The rescue group quickly rushed to assist Jay. Right after, our protagonist swiftly applied a bandage to what was left of his arm. He looked at his friend with extreme concern, reflecting that he used aura to stop the bleeding, but the situation was far from good. The monsters nearby took advantage of this moment to quietly approach the boys, but Sen, from behind, screamed with rage, drawing the monsters toward her. Her aura echoed down the entire street, catching the attention of all the canines. One of her teammates asked if she was okay, to which the woman simply replied that she was fine and that the monster was too fast for something so large. She added that she was trying to hit a vital point, but it was hard to reach the monster's head. Her teammate said that the Gwanga rescue group had arrived so they could try attacking together and finish the monster. And no sooner said than done, the monster was caught off guard by the simultaneous attacks. Without wasting time, the redhead and her group already positioned themselves to strike. Sen jumped across shops and signboards to gain more height. She finished by leaping directly at the monster from above to attack it from the air. She prepared a solid thrust with her ninja, imbued with aura, and as she delivered her blow, she shouted for the monster to just fall and leave this world. She pierced its head in a devastating strike that caused a massive shockwave, slamming it to the ground. The monster muttered while staggering after the blow, but in the end, it collapsed onto the cracked ground and slowly faded away. Sinus was no longer moving, and one of the invaders thanked everyone for their work, while another called for the healing team. The portal began to close. Only 10 seconds remained until it was all over. But something bothered our protagonist, who kept staring at the portal, thinking it felt like something was still there. And there really was. A huge humanoid monster with massive fangs. Our hero stared in fear at the scene because what was in front of him was an orc. The portal, which should have been closed, remained open. Our hero kept staring at it, terrified. From inside the portal, the creature continued staring at them. His injured friend called out in pain, saying, "Hung." Seaman immediately responded, calling out to his friend and asking if he was okay, but his friend was only worried about the civilian. Our hero confirmed to his friend that, thanks to him, the man was safe. Jay added that he didn't ask for that, but in the end, he turned out to be a good invader. A bit saddened, our protagonist simply agreed with those words while holding his friend in his arms, looking at him with a gentle expression. He confirmed once again that Jay was absolutely right. He did a good job. The next morning, our protagonist was running a marathon while reflecting on what happened. The damage to the city had been repaired, and everyone returned to their normal lives. However, fighting monsters was much harder than expected. If help hadn't arrived, it would have been the end for everyone. The boy spent the entire day training, and now at night he was at the gym, lifting weights. He started to intensify his workout while remembering what happened and the damage that monster caused to his friend. A mustache man entered the gym and said it was already time to go home. The protagonist put the weights back in place and asked what time it was now. The man simply repeated his name, Seaman, while taking a deep breath and asking if he'd like to go out for a drink with him now. At another place, at a street shop, they were drinking together as the man apologized for what happened to Jay. Seaman asked the man if he knew that he was an awakened, which the director confirmed he already knew. Our hero continued, saying that even though he was awakened, at that moment when he should have acted, he just stood there. He downed another shot while the director just listened silently. Our protagonist went on to say that because of his hesitation, his friend ended up in that condition. In the end, he asked the director if it was okay for someone like him to become an invader. The boy looked down, ashamed, while the man just watched him in silence. To break the ice, the director said he used to be a boxer before opening the gym, which surprised the boy. The man got a little annoyed and told him not to look at him like that. When he was younger, he was really strong and fast. Seaman said the director must have been a great fighter. The mustached man laughed loudly and said he wasn't joking, but the fact that he wasn't joking was the real problem. He began recalling his past, saying he had a rival who was like a brother to him, but that rival fell and never got up again after a fight they had. After that event, he was never able to step into a ring again. Finishing his story, he asked the protagonist if he knew why he was telling him all this. The boy questioned the reason, and the older man simply added that he told the story so Seaman didn't become someone ordinary, bombarding the boy with questions. The man kept firing words, asking if Seaman was just going to stand around crying and do nothing. The boy tried to reject the statements but was interrupted by the director, saying there's no such thing as a perfect human being. In fact, he himself couldn't continue his career after seeing his opponent on the ground, but all humans make mistakes, and in the end, everyone tries to fix their flaws. But of course, that's just as terrifying. But in the end, fear doesn't matter because no matter what has happened or will happen, you must keep moving forward. They both toasted their shots at the end of the monologue, and finally the man asked Seaman if he thought he could beat him in a fight, with the protagonist laughing and saying he thought the old man would win. The old man, excited, said that compared to today, his younger self was super scrawny and weak, but he added that even so, if he fought the boy today, he might lose because of his age. Seaman drank his last shot and firmly stated that yes, he agreed with the old man. He was currently repeating combat simulations against Zorgs, the same Nightwolf from his trauma, and it was clear how determined he was to do well in his training. He ended the combat with a swift circular movement that sliced the monster in half. His trainer yelled at him, saying that Seaman should not give in to fear or anger, then asked him if he wanted to continue, to which the hero simply confirmed, ending his statement by saying that this time he wanted to fight Sinus. A gigantic dragon wolf now stared at him directly. Seaman readied himself with his sword while facing the monster towering above him. He then charged forward with violent force toward the creature and delivered a circular strike to its front leg. The monster charged at him with one of its paws, trying to crush him, but again the boy dodged, unifying form and will in Singuquan, a martial art that flows with the mind. Seaman advanced with his sword glowing against the wolf and delivered a precise strike to the creature's neck with a massive aura radiating from the slash. Sinus howled in pain as he watched, while the protagonist finished his attack with the monster defeated. Seaman reflected in thought that the more he trained, the more he reacted purely by reflex. He took a deep breath for a moment while beginning to recall the day when it all happened, and reflected that everything could have been different if he had taken action, regretting not being able to turn back time. Sinus was summoned again, this time in the second stage of the simulation. The monster, even bigger and stronger, roared at the protagonist, who did not flinch and already prepared for another battle. We fast forward in time to the day of the second test. Now present at the Coliseum for another trial, our protagonist was wearing a uniform similar to a police uniform. In the middle of the crowd, one of the staff members asked what kind of weapon the boy would use, and he requested a sword. But when he grabbed the wooden sword, he reflected in thought that it was poorly made, even for training purposes. Around him, it was said that there was an immortal present, someone with a platinum mark, Le Yun, who was overseeing the exam. At the Coliseum microphone, a classy man with glasses began his speech, congratulating those who passed the first test and explaining the second. Now the test would be a rescue scenario. The equipment of those present had sensors that would disqualify them if they received a fatal hit. The rules were simple: defeat as many opponents as possible and be the last one standing. After signing the contract, all that was left was to enter the testing area. In the end, he wished everyone good luck. The massive gate opened, revealing the sun outside a vast, sunny park filled with trees. Only 5 minutes remained before everything began. During that time, everyone was free to choose a place to stay. The game began, and the protagonist simply stood still in the same spot. One of the extras asked him what he was doing, just standing there. Seaman remained silent, just wondering if that man was thinking the same thing as him, just standing still and observing. But the man simply said he'd have to fight first. However, before he could finish his sentence, our protagonist already struck him with a vertical downward slash, one that got blocked. His opponent tried to counter with a horizontal circular strike while calling him impatient, but the attack was dodged. The fight between the two intensified as the spearman struck repeatedly, taking advantage of his reach. He was already celebrating victory, but before he realized it, one of his strikes was deflected by the sword. The hero captured the opponent's spear using the guard of his bladed weapon, and just as his opponent began to taunt him, he dropped his weapon and charged at his opponent, grabbing the man's face with the palm of his hand. Our boy already prepared a punch against the spearman, who questioned why the protagonist threw away his weapon. A loud bang echoed through the air, and an announcement was made to all players. -222 had been disqualified. Player number 13 had achieved the first kill of the event and would receive bonus points for the first victory. Seaman picked up his sword again and began walking through the area. Meanwhile, the evaluators were watching everything through the cameras, commenting on the first kill. Upon hearing that player 222 was defeated, a member of the Hosen Company was surprised by the news. He reflected in disbelief, wondering how someone could have defeated that specific player. Another man present from the Renegades faction said he heard about a new member in the Iron Horse this year. Yet another in the viewing booth from the Infinite Society said he heard about someone with an aura over 30,000. Sen was also there and said that person was very enthusiastic, reflecting further that she thought he seemed very hopeful and that she believed he was someone she could trust. Several fighters fell one after another. Fighters 185, 89, and 77 all fell around someone with long hair, player 172, with 3 consecutive kills. This player was Yubi, the greatest martial artist of all time. The celestial demon Dako Chinima once said that fighting using your aura means overpowering your enemy's entire universe to your favor. Fighting monsters was on a completely different level than hunting animals with firearms, because in battles against monsters you must stab through your own life and your own world. That's what it meant to battle between invaders. With a single blow, the protagonist sent both players flying with extreme ease. Player number 156 and player number 66 were now out of combat. Watching from the booth, the members present praised the hero's speed as they wondered where he came from. The man in the dark suit asked if he would be a good candidate for the Wooduk Association. The redhead jumped up from her chair in shock. One of the men present asked if she knew who he was, and Sen shouted that yes, she knew him. Back in the game, we saw one of the participants terrified while holding his sword. Yubi charged at him at extreme speed, wielding her weapon, and struck him with a precise thrust to the chest. She took a deep breath after defeating her opponent. Another player, number 27, was now out of combat. The girl reflected in thought about who her next opponent might be until she heard something in the background that caught her attention. When she turned around, she was face to face with the protagonist. She tried to remember who he was, recalling the day of the wolf attack, remembering that he was just trembling with fear and couldn't do anything. The hero looked at her with a very serious expression, and she gave him a smile, saying it had been a while since they'd seen each other. As she watched Seaman, she reflected that he was the one who made the bet with Seon and called him unimportant. But she noticed the number of kills he'd made, wondering if he might be that type of person, someone with a very high skill level but who was terrified of monsters. She finished her thought and called him to fight. She prepared a horizontal swing with her sword, and with a quick leg sweep tried to slash the boy's face. Sen was surprised by such speed, and reflected that apparently it wasn't just the girl's aura that had great value. With steps similar to a dance, she spun and prepared another strike against the hero, who raised his sword to defend himself. The blow made a loud noise and sent Seaman flying backward. Without wasting time, he kicked the protagonist, who blocked it with his arms. A few seconds passed as both fighters stared each other down. The girl began to reflect on the events of the fight. Even after being kicked, Seaman countered her with his sword while defending himself, and Yubi reflected that his skills surpassed hers. The woman touched her injured chin with her thumb while showing a faint smile. She began untying her hair while reflecting that seeing people like him made her feel very uneasy. When she finished untying her hair, Yubi's aura looked like it was about to explode, and the protagonist watched, and all that woman had the aura of a monster. Then we were taken to an explanation about the sword of Fukma, which means to subdue. This causes someone or something to yield to it, but at the same time that sword contains a demon. The one who wields it may become corrupted and submit to it. The girl calmly prepared her next attack. Meanwhile, the hero reflected that hers was an extraordinary aura, and he had no idea how someone could emit such power like a monster. But as he stared at her, he reflected that yes, he was very scared on the day of the monster attack. Taking a step forward, he finished his thought while facing his opponent with resolve. He positioned his sword toward her and prepared his aura for battle. The girl said to Seaman that he looked different from the boy she saw last time, and our hero cynically replied that he adapted easily to situations, finishing by saying that he couldn't just run away again. They both stared at each other, Seaman with seriousness and Yubi with superiority and malice, face to face in a final moment. After the dialogue, the first offensive move came from Yubi, who charged quickly at the protagonist. He gripped his sword tightly while gritting his teeth, preparing for impact. But before anything began, time ran out. They were about to clash blades, but the timer ended just in time. This surprised both fighters, who didn't expect that resolution. The loudspeakers continued explaining the end of the exam, while both Seaman and Yubi fell to the ground, listening to the voices. In his thoughts, our protagonist sighed that he managed to survive. In another location, everyone was instructed to head to the indicated place. Now came the final evaluation with a different format. The best players from rounds 1 and 2 wouldn't get much rest. This was the twist of the exam. This year, the final test would be an essay, which surprised everyone. The test was based on answering the current question in 5,000 characters or less. Whispers began to spread through the room, but honestly, it felt like those elementary school questions. When all of this started, he was obsessed with becoming an invader to bring justice. He reflected on being an orphan and that over time he realized he had been abandoned, now adopted by his current guardians, his new parents, those who answered his call, those who didn't need to say a single word for him to feel loved. He remembered his parents' words about who he wanted to become and about how everyone in the world has a purpose, adding that finding him was their purpose. They didn't need to say anything more complex for him to understand the message. After hearing the news that his biological mother had passed away, he believed they were saying those things because of that. His parents told him not to push himself too hard in training and to take care of himself, something the protagonist simply agreed with. Then his father told his son to stay strong in his name. When asked, he added that Seaman means world and people. Become an invader to protect the people. Seaman, his father finished his advice while his son watched him in admiration. Then Seaman finished by thanking them for raising him as he bowed to them. With 5 minutes remaining before the final deadline, the boy asked himself once more why he wanted to become an invader and what was the mission of an invader to him. Humans fight monsters, and the only way to win is with their aura. Why did he receive this power, and why did he feel so connected to it? He questioned these words while remembering the day he received the calling, saying that he wasn't a coward. To protect the world in peace, that was his reason. He concluded as he remembered his friend in his arms and his trainer, that's why he became an invader. The exam ended and a few days passed. Now we were at the hospital, seeing the protagonist open a door. This was the room of his friend Jay, who was reading at that moment. He asked his friend if he was doing okay, and the latter simply replied that the book was pretty cool and asked if Seaman would like to read it, but the hero just said he wasn't really into that kind of reading. He then asked when Jay would be discharged, but his friend replied that it would be a while, and that he planned to take the opportunity to study. Seaman was surprised by that statement, and his friend got irritated, saying that, even if it didn't seem like it, he wasn't that smart. Jay asked if Seaman knew what a quadratic formula was, and the protagonist answered that he didn't. Just as a fun fact, this formula is called Bhaskara's formula in Brazil. After hearing his friend's response, Jay laughed a lot and said Seaman was worse than he was. Seaman stayed silent, looking at his friend as if grateful to see him well, but he broke the silence, calling him by name and adding that he would heal his arm, though it might take a while. His friend replied that he believed in him and that one day he'd become a firefighter. This statement surprised the protagonist, who questioned the idea, but his friend just added that firefighters were just as incredible as invaders. As he ruffled his friend's hair, our hero said goodbye, and Jay, with a smile on his face, said goodbye as well. But before the boy could leave, his friend asked when they'd see each other again, and the protagonist replied that probably in 2 years, and asked Jay to stay strong because he'd come back, finishing by firmly asking if he understood the message. He reflected on being an orphan and that over time he realized he had been abandoned, now adopted by his current guardians, his new parents, those who answered his call, those who didn't need to say a single word for him to feel loved. He remembered his parents' words about who he wanted to become and about how everyone in the world has a purpose, adding that finding him was their purpose. They didn't need to say anything more complex for him to understand the message. After hearing the news that his biological mother had passed away, he believed they were saying those things because of that. His parents told him not to push himself too hard in training and to take care of himself, something the protagonist simply agreed with. Then his father told his son to stay strong in his name. When asked, he added that Seaman means world and people. Become an invader to protect the people. Seaman, his father finished his advice while his son watched him in admiration. Then Seaman finished by thanking them for raising him as he bowed to them. With 5 minutes remaining before the final deadline, the boy asked himself once more why he wanted to become an invader and what was the mission of an invader to him. Humans fight monsters, and the only way to win is with their aura. Why did he receive this power, and why did he feel so connected to it? He questioned these words while remembering the day he received the calling, saying that he wasn't a coward. To protect the world in peace, that was his reason. He concluded as he remembered his friend in his arms and his trainer, that's why he became an invader. The exam ended and a few days passed. Now we were at the hospital, seeing the protagonist open a door. This was the room of his friend Jay, who was reading at that moment. He asked his friend if he was doing okay, and the latter simply replied that the book was pretty cool and asked if Seaman would like to read it, but the hero just said he wasn't really into that kind of reading. He then asked when Jay would be discharged, but his friend replied that it would be a while, and that he planned to take the opportunity to study. Seaman was surprised by that statement, and his friend got irritated, saying that, even if it didn't seem like it, he wasn't that smart. Jay asked if Seaman knew what a quadratic formula was, and the protagonist answered that he didn't. Just as a fun fact, this formula is called Bhaskara's formula in Brazil. After hearing his friend's response, Jay laughed a lot and said Seaman was worse than he was. Seaman stayed silent, looking at his friend as if grateful to see him well, but he broke the silence, calling him by name and adding that he would heal his arm, though it might take a while. His friend replied that he believed in him and that one day he'd become a firefighter. This statement surprised the protagonist, who questioned the idea, but his friend just added that firefighters were just as incredible as invaders. As he ruffled his friend's hair, our hero said goodbye, and Jay, with a smile on his face, said goodbye as well. But before the boy could leave, his friend asked when they'd see each other again, and the protagonist replied that probably in 2 years, and asked Jay to stay strong because he'd come back, finishing by firmly asking if he understood the message. Yil, after hearing that, hesitated a bit before telling the truth and asked if the boy knew what happened if an invader failed to defeat a monster. The protagonist tried to say that an event would happen, but was interrupted by the soldier, asking what kind of event that would be. Now more thoughtful, the boy continued, saying he heard that in the past, some kind of event used to occur when the invader system wasn't well developed. Nowadays, when people talk about portals, they think of dangerous dimensions or kinds of mines. But what happens if the invaders fail to stop the portals? Lee wondered in his mind. Finally, the soldier asked if he had finished eating, and the protagonist said there was still a bit left, but the soldier added that it was happening right now. They went outside, and the soldier, with several high jumps, positioned himself above an observation point, which impressed Seaman due to Gil's incredible agility. Already at the top, he told the boy to climb up to the place, which was obeyed, with the protagonist also climbing, apparently with a single jump, something that impressed the soldier, who praised the boy. He asked if Lee could see the forest in front of him. The northern part of the DMZ was soaked with monsters. He said, "It's like hell on earth." While we saw various monsters fighting each other in that area, our protagonist was speechless, just observing the place. The soldier finished by saying they existed to prepare for the worst. Gil asked if Lee was scared, a statement that was denied. Our boy kept thinking about everything that had happened and, determined, looking at the landscape of chaos before him, he affirmed to himself in thought that now was the time to start from the beginning. The next day, at 5 a.m., Lee's alarm clock rang and he got up immediately. He left his room silently and headed to the hallway. Our protagonist saluted the immortal present there, and he said that Seaman was quick, as expected. He asked what Lee brought for breakfast that day, and Seaman explained it to him with a huge list. Our boy got water from the faucet and started heading back to his room, mentally counting down. The bell rang and the protagonist opened the window, shouting for everyone to wake up, and he asked once again for Sergeant Kim Hyun to get up, but was answered with murmurs. But our boy approached, offering him water, and said once again to get up, saying that today the officer was First Lieutenant Hen. Everyone in the dorm started getting ready. Kim asked if everyone made their beds and was answered with confirmation. He asked everyone to go now. In the Corps Guard, a shout for attention. The person in charge said that the expedition team would return today and that everyone must ensure they could rest, so they must stay alert. Gil asked if Seaman heard clearly about the squad leader returning and was answered with confirmation, but then the boy asked what this so-called expedition was. The soldier answered that it was supposedly something in North Korea. Even though that was the classification, it was strange because North Korea had currently collapsed. There were currently only a few guardians protecting some cities, but they were at a complete disadvantage compared to the monsters. As a result, South Korea, China, and Russia formed a defensive line to block the monsters. That's all they knew about North Korea's support in protecting South Korea. That's what they called the expedition. But either way, Lee shouldn't make the surgeon grumpy because he wasn't an ordinary person. They returned to the cafeteria while Gil asked what the boy wanted to eat. Entering the place, the soldier cheerfully greeted the surgeon for having returned, to which the sergeant responded saying it had been a while, and he asked who was the one present. Gil said he was just a new recruit. Sergeant Jang Woo said that if that was all, he needed to take a shower, and then they should talk. He asked Gil to empty his bag for him. That backpack had a horrible smell, and the protagonist asked if the soldier was going to wash it to deal with that until something fell from the bag, a monster's head. It was the creature classified as number 10 emirate. The protagonist started reflecting on it, saying that one would need a gold mark to be able to hunt one of those alone. Later, they met with the surgeon again, who asked if anything different happened this time, and the soldier mentioned Lee's weapon. He continued, revealing more about his companion, giving details about how he brought a sword at the time of recruitment. The sergeant simply asked to see what sword it was out of curiosity, and as said, the sword was shown to him. As he picked it up, he read the inscriptions in silence. Then he said the word, name. Yil, annoyed, asked Lee to just say his name already, and the boy yelled, embarrassed, that his name was Seaman. The sergeant asked if he really liked that weapon, and a bit uncertain, the boy affirmed that he did. John gave a very serious look to Seaman and asked again if that was true, because if it was, he should keep using that weapon. And he asked if Lee came to that place prepared to be an invader, which was confirmed with a yes. The sergeant said they'd talk more later after he rested, so he told the boy to go do his job. Yil struck a pose while watching and asked Lee if he liked the sergeant, and the boy just hugged his sword, very happy, saying yes. Adding to that, the soldier said the sergeant didn't smile much and asked where that weapon came from. The protagonist said it came from the Jaeyoung metal industry. Gil added that the company belonged to Jang's father, with Lee asking in surprise if that was true. The protagonist asked if the sergeant was really that scary, and the soldier simply said that if he did his job right, everything would be fine. Lee said that really sounded like the army, and Yil asked if that was something to say. Later that day, during sunset, everyone gathered in the courtyard once again, calling Seaman's attention. The officer shouted his name and was answered immediately. The officer ordered Seaman to explain what Brucus was, and Lee answered that it was system number 23, Brucus, more commonly called Earth Pup. This monster used its powerful teeth to bite and used various strategies to succeed since it attacked in groups. and occasionally another monster called Brucus Warrior appeared. It was much larger and had far more powerful attacks, so there were debates about separating it under another identification number. The officer asked if the boy studied monsters while in society, but the boy shouted that he was just a regular candidate. Around him, the soldiers said he was amazing and the best in the squad. Another question was asked by the officer, this time to Yoon. The question was about Brucus's weak point, and Yoon replied that it was the abdomen. He added that Brucus had poor vision, so they must dodge it and strike at blind spots with strong, precise thrusts. Then the officer added that if the strike came from the side, the sword might bounce and fly off, so they must train thrusts starting now. The protagonist grabbed his new sword with joy in his eyes and started his training with various precise sword movements while moving around. In the end, he received praise from all sides, being called a genius, but he reacted humbly and flattered until the alarm sounded.